Most people think billionaires are geniuses. They're not. They just understand human stupidity, mostly their own, and use it to their advantage. You don't need a higher IQ. You need fewer psychological blind spots. The problem isn't ignorance. It's what you know that just isn't so. Most people start with the question, how can I become rich? And that's precisely why most people stay poor. It's the wrong question. A far better question, and one that billionaires quietly obsess over, is how can I avoid being stupid? That's inversion, thinking backward. Instead of looking for the recipe for success, you identify the ingredients of failure and simply avoid them. It sounds too simple to be profound, but it's one of the most powerful mental tricks ever discovered. The human mind loves direct paths. We think progress comes from addition, more knowledge, more effort, more opportunity. But the world often rewards subtraction. Avoiding stupidity is easier than seeking brilliance, and it's usually more reliable. When you make fewer dumb mistakes, success has a funny way of showing up uninvited. If you think about it, most of the great financial and personal disasters in life don't come from a lack of genius. They come from a lack of discipline. People ruin themselves with envy, ego, overconfidence, and impatience. They chase the next big thing, leverage their future for temporary pleasure, or follow the crowd into madness. It's never the market or fate that destroys them. It's themselves. So when I say think backwards, I mean, you start with the end you want to avoid and then reason your way out of it. Want to stay financially healthy? Then don't take on debt you can't afford. Don't speculate in what you don't understand, and don't partner with people you don't trust. Avoid those, and you've already done more for your financial future than any hot stock tip ever could. Inversion is humility in practice. It's the mind admitting, I don't know everything, but I do know where the cliffs are. That kind of thinking protects you. It forces you to confront reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. Every pilot learns that the best way to stay alive is not to find perfect weather, but to know where the storms are and avoid them. Investing and life are no different. Now, the trouble is, people hate thinking this way because there's no immediate reward for what doesn't happen. You don't get applause for the crises you avoid or the bad deals you refuse. But over a lifetime, those invisible victories compound quietly, and they define the difference between a stable life and a disastrous one. Let me give you an example. In the late 1990s, everyone was throwing money at internet stocks. Companies with no profits, no plan, and no sanity were suddenly worth billions. It was a party, and everyone wanted to dance. Warren and I looked around and said, we don't understand this stuff. So we sat it out. We got called old-fashioned, outdated, out of touch. But when the music stopped, we were still standing. That's inversion, winning by not losing. And this idea doesn't just apply to money. It applies to character, relationships, health, even happiness. Ask yourself, what would make me miserable? Then stop doing those things. Avoid toxic people, avoid dishonesty, avoid resentment. You'll find that removing stupidity creates a vacuum that intelligence naturally fills. The philosopher Seneca said, what progress, you ask, have I made? I have begun to be a friend to myself. That's what inversion really is. It's befriending your own future self by not sabotaging it in the present. Our culture glorifies the idea of addition, more ambition, more hustle, more noise. But most of life's wisdom lies in subtraction, removing the behaviors that make you foolish. Billionaires understand this intuitively. They don't win because they always pick the best investments or ideas. They win because they have the discipline to walk away from the worst ones. If you can train your mind to think backwards, you develop what I call negative wisdom. Instead of trying to predict success, you predict disaster, and then quietly step out of its path. Over time, the compounding effect of not doing dumb things produces results that seem miraculous. But they're not miracles, they're math. Every mistake avoided earns interest. Every bad habit broken compounds. Every temptation resisted preserves optionality for the future. And optionality, having room to maneuver, is the real secret wealth builders guard most closely. So whenever you face a hard decision, don't just ask, what will make this succeed? Ask, what could make this fail? Write down every possible way you could ruin it, emotionally, financially, morally, and then make damn sure you don't do those things. You'll be shocked how effective that simple habit is. It's not glamorous advice. It won't sell a book or fill a seminar hall, but it works. And like most good ideas, it only looks simple once you've lived long enough to appreciate its depth. You don't need to be brilliant to live well or invest wisely. You just need to consistently avoid being stupid. That's the essence of inversion, winning by subtraction. And the older you get, the more you realize that most of success in life is simply avoiding the obvious mistakes everyone else insists on making. The second mind trick that billionaires quietly master is patience. And I don't mean the kind of patience you learn in line at the grocery store. I'm talking about the deep strategic patience that lets time become your unpaid employee, your most reliable business partner. The modern world despises patience. Everything is designed to make you restless. Your phone buzzes, your feed updates, your attention fragments. You're trained to chase the next thing before the last thing is even settled. But here's the truth that nobody in a hurry wants to hear. Compounding only works if you sit still long enough to let it happen. People ask me all the time, what's the biggest advantage you and Warren had? And I tell them, we've been consistently not stupid for a very long time. Time rewards consistency. It's not brilliance that compounds, it's behavior. And if you behave well long enough, the math takes care of the rest. But most people sabotage themselves by demanding results too early. They plant a seed and then dig it up every week to see if it's growing. That's not investing, that's neurosis. The same applies to building a career, a reputation, or even a relationship. You can't microwave trust. You can't rush wisdom. Time is the filter that separates luck from skill, noise from signal, and hype from value. There's a psychological reason this is so difficult. The human brain evolved for immediacy. For most of history, waiting too long meant starving. But in modern life, impatience is the killer. It makes people chase trends, abandon good strategies, and fall for shortcuts that don't exist. It's the mental equivalent of eating the marshmallow instead of waiting for two. Now, billionaires understand something that most people never internalize. Compounding isn't just about money. It's about character, habits, and decision quality. When you invest in yourself, reading, thinking, choosing your environment carefully, the return doesn't show up tomorrow. But 5, 10, 20 years later, the gap between you and the impatient crowd becomes a canyon. You see this in business all the time. A company that reinvests patiently in quality, hiring good people, building systems, refining products, looks boring for years. Then one day the market wakes up and calls it an overnight success. But the truth is it was a 20-year overnight success. Time hid the compounding until it became too big to ignore. The same pattern shows up in personal finance. Everyone's obsessed with finding the next hot investment. Meanwhile, the patient investor quietly compounds at a modest rate year after year, letting the snowball roll downhill. By the time the impatient crowd realizes what's happening, the patient one is too far ahead to catch. Patience isn't passive. It's not about doing nothing. It's about doing the right things long enough for them to matter. It takes tremendous mental strength to let good decisions mature. The world will tempt you with noise, panic, and novelty. It will tell you that you're missing out, that you need to act fast. But almost everything valuable in life, trust, mastery, wealth, moves at the speed of time, not desire. Warren likes to say, you can't produce a baby in 1 month by getting 9 women pregnant. That's patience in a nutshell. Some things just can't be rushed, no matter how clever you think you are. And the truly wise accept that constraint rather than fight it. This isn't just financial advice, it's philosophical. Patience is a form of humility. It's an acknowledgement that the world doesn't bend to your schedule. You can make decisions, but you can't dictate outcomes. You can sow, but you can't control the seasons. That humility is what keeps great investors sane and keeps ordinary people from self-destructing. If you ever study the habits of the wealthiest people, you'll find an eerie calm about them. They don't flinch with every market tick or panic at every headline. They know that time amplifies sound judgment and punishes impulsive behavior. They don't get richer by thinking faster. They get richer by thinking longer. There's a kind of paradox here. The more you try to force time, the less it works for you. But if you learn to cooperate with it, it becomes a lever of unimaginable power. The key is to align your behavior with time's rhythm instead of fighting it. Save consistently, learn daily, think long-term, and refuse to interrupt compounding unnecessarily. Patience may look slow, but it's actually the fastest way to get anywhere worth going because everyone else keeps starting over. The best test of patience is how well you can endure boredom. The market rewards those who can sit quietly while others are busy reacting. Most people can't do that. They equate movement with progress and busyness with intelligence. But billionaires know that boredom is often the sound of money or wisdom compounding quietly in the background. So the next time you feel restless, remember this: impatience is expensive. It costs you opportunities, relationships, and peace of mind. Patience, on the other hand, is free, and it pays dividends for a lifetime. The third mind trick billionaires understand, though they rarely talk about it, is how to outsmart their own brains. And let me tell you, that's no small task. The human brain is a marvelous machine, but it's also a devious one. It constantly whispers bad advice, dresses up emotion as logic, and makes you confident when you should be cautious. If you don't learn to manage it, it will quietly ruin you. Now, most people assume intelligence protects them from bias. It doesn't. In fact, intelligence often makes bias more dangerous. Smart people are especially good at building elaborate justifications for their dumb decisions. They use reason to defend emotion. That's how you end up with hedge fund managers losing billions while quoting Aristotle. Understanding bias isn't just an academic exercise, it's self-defense. Billionaires study psychology not to manipulate other people, but to avoid being manipulated themselves. They know the biggest risk in business, investing, or life is not external, it's internal. It's the mind's tendency to see patterns where none exist, to follow the herd, to crave validation, to avoid discomfort. Think about the most destructive forces in finance: greed, fear, envy, overconfidence. None of them come from the outside world. They come from the inside. The market doesn't create your stupidity, it merely exposes it. One of the worst offenders is confirmation bias. Once you form an opinion, your brain starts filtering information to support it. You stop seeing reality and start seeing reinforcement. If you buy a stock, suddenly every article that praises it feels brilliant and every warning looks stupid. That's not intelligence, that's ego wearing a lab coat. So the first rule of outsmarting your own brain is to build habits that make self-deception harder. Read from opposing viewpoints. Seek out intelligent disagreement. Force yourself to explain your beliefs to someone who isn't impressed by you. The test of clarity is not how smart you sound to yourself. It's whether you can survive scrutiny from others. Then there's what psychologists call social proof. People do what others do because it feels safer. We're herd animals. But remember, crowds can go insane just as easily as individuals. History is full of smart people doing stupid things together. Markets, empires, religions, you name it. Whenever everyone around you starts agreeing on something with great enthusiasm, that's the moment to get suspicious. Billionaires don't have some secret formula for predicting the future. What they do have is a habit of questioning their own certainty. They understand that the brain's natural state is overconfidence, and overconfidence combined with leverage is how people blow up fortunes, companies, and countries. To counteract that, you have to build what I call mental speed bumps, mechanisms that slow your thinking when your emotions want to accelerate it. Before making a big decision, stop and ask, what evidence would prove me wrong? Or what if the opposite is true? These simple questions can save you from decades of regret. Another dangerous bias is what psychologists call availability. We give too much weight to what's vivid or recent. The mind mistakes what's loud for what's likely. If a plane crashes, people stop flying, even though statistically it's safer than driving. If a stock goes up for a month, people assume it will rise forever. The mind doesn't calculate probabilities, it collects stories. And that's the deeper issue. Humans are storytelling creatures. We'd rather have a coherent narrative than a complicated truth. But the world doesn't run on stories. It runs on reality. The job of the rational thinker is to constantly remind himself of that, especially when the story feels good. Now, I don't mean you can ever eliminate bias. You can't. The goal isn't perfection, it's awareness. You don't need to stop being human. You just need to stop being unconsciously human. Knowing your tendencies makes you harder to fool, especially by yourself. In our firm, we used to keep a mental checklist of common psychological traps: incentive bias, authority bias, anchoring, consistency, and so on. Every time we faced a decision, we'd mentally run through them like a pilot before takeoff. It's not exciting work, but it's life-saving. The biggest edge in any competitive field is simply avoiding the dumb mistakes everyone else repeats. And remember, bias doesn't just distort how you see the world. It distorts how you see yourself. It flatters your strengths, excuses your weaknesses, and keeps you comfortably deluded. The cure is brutal honesty. When something goes wrong, don't blame luck or others. Ask what blind spot you missed. Over time, that habit of ruthless self-examination compounds into real wisdom. The truth is, reality always wins in the end. You can ignore it, rationalize it, or delay it, but you can't escape it. The more your mind aligns with how the world actually works, the luckier you'll seem to others. But it won't be luck, it'll be clarity. The difference between ordinary people and extraordinary ones isn't IQ. It's how accurately they see through their own illusions. If you want to understand how billionaires make consistently smart decisions, you need to grasp one of the simplest and most ignored principles in the world: know what you don't know. That's what I call staying within your circle of competence. It's astonishing how many people go broke, not because they're unintelligent, but because they refuse to admit the limits of their knowledge. They think being smart means having an opinion on everything. It doesn't. Intelligence without boundaries is like horsepower without brakes. It's impressive right up until the moment you crash. The world is full of people trying to look clever in fields they don't understand. They'll invest in something because their friend said it was the next big thing, or they'll copy what's trending because they don't want to look left out. That's not thinking, that's imitation dressed up as insight. And imitation in complex systems is a shortcut to disaster. I've spent a lifetime avoiding things I don't understand. That single habit has probably saved me more money and misery than any so-called winning strategy. When people ask Warren and me why we miss certain tech booms, we tell them the truth. We didn't understand it. And if we don't understand, we don't touch it. It's not that complicated. The world doesn't reward you for swinging at every pitch. It rewards you for waiting for the one that's in your sweet spot. Now, the idea of a circle of competence isn't about how big your circle is. Most people think the goal is to know everything. Wrong. The goal is to know precisely where your boundaries lie. You can be incredibly successful with a small circle as long as you stay within it. A deep well is far more valuable than a wide puddle. People don't fail because their circle is too small. They fail because they don't know where it ends. They mistake familiarity for understanding. They read a few articles, hear a few success stories, and suddenly they're experts. But knowing a little about a thing is often more dangerous than knowing nothing at all. When you know nothing, you're cautious. When you know a little, you get bold. That's when you step outside your circle and reality delivers its lesson. The problem is ego. Ego hates boundaries. It wants to believe you can master anything instantly. But humility is the guardrail of intelligence. Knowing your limits isn't weakness, it's strength. It protects you from the illusion of competence, which is far more expensive than ignorance. Think of your circle of competence as a map. Inside the circle are the areas where you've put in the time, studied the patterns, made the mistakes, and learned the lessons. Outside the circle is everything else: tempting, glittering, seductive, and deadly. The world will constantly invite you to wander out there. That's where the excitement is, but it's also where the bodies are buried. Most billionaires quietly specialize. They go deep into one domain until they see what others can't. They don't try to master everything. They build an edge where their understanding is sharper than average. That's how you get leverage. That's how you make decisions with confidence while others hesitate. There's a paradox here. The more clearly you see your limits, the more capable you actually become. Because the brain that knows when to say, I don't know, is far more powerful than the one that pretends to. Every time you admit ignorance, you create space for accuracy. Every time you pretend expertise, you destroy it. Now, the circle of competence doesn't stay fixed. You can expand it, but you must do it deliberately. Learning should be like building a bridge, methodical, piece by piece. You read, you test, you observe, you fail, and eventually you know. That's how your circle grows, slowly, honestly, without pretending. The danger comes when you skip the learning and go straight to the confidence. Let me tell you something simple. If you stay disciplined about what you understand, the world will think you're a genius. Because most people can't resist the temptation to dabble in nonsense. They'll jump into businesses they can't run, markets they don't grasp, or partnerships they can't manage, all because they can't stand the idea of missing out. But wisdom isn't about participation, it's about selection. So, how do you find your circle? Start with brutal honesty. Ask yourself, what do I really understand well enough to bet my future on? If you can't explain it clearly to a reasonably intelligent person, you don't understand it well enough. It's as simple as that. Once you've drawn that circle, defend it, guard it from greed, envy, and overconfidence. Because the moment you step outside of it, the world will remind you that it's not as forgiving as your imagination. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Knowing what you don't know is far more useful than being brilliant. The world is full of brilliant people who blew themselves up because they refused to admit ignorance. You can't outperform your understanding. You can only compound what you truly grasp. The discipline to stay within your circle of competence is one of the most underrated mental advantages you can have. It's not glamorous, but it's how you stay solvent while the clever people self-destruct trying to prove how clever they are. If there's one thing that consistently separates those who get rich and stay rich from those who don't, it's discipline. Not brilliance, not luck, not even timing, just plain, unexciting discipline. It's not glamorous, it doesn't make headlines. But over a lifetime, it quietly outperforms almost everything else. Most people lose because they can't tolerate boredom. They think success should feel like excitement, like fireworks and constant action. But the truth is, real progress often looks dull. It's the daily habit of doing simple things well, saving a little more, learning a little more, thinking a little longer, and avoiding stupid mistakes. You don't see the results right away, but they build like layers of sediment over years until one day people call you lucky. Discipline, in its essence, is the ability to do what's right when it's not fun. And that's where most people fall apart. The world makes it very easy to abandon long-term thinking. Every screen, every ad, every voice around you says, act now. Nobody says, wait, think, endure. But that's where the edge is. Billionaires don't necessarily work harder. They just stay on the right track longer. If you study the habits of successful investors, you'll notice how incredibly repetitive their routines are. They read, they think, they say no to 99% of opportunities, and they stick with the same principles decade after decade. It looks boring because it is boring, but that's the beauty of it. Discipline thrives in environments where others lose interest. The market, the economy, even life itself, these are systems that reward consistency over intensity. Most people can be disciplined for a week. Few can stay disciplined for decades. That's why compounding seems like magic to the impatient. But there's nothing mystical about it. It's arithmetic. Discipline is what gives compounding time to work. One of the great misconceptions about wealth is that it's built through constant action. In truth, it's often built through inaction, knowing when not to act, when not to panic, when not to chase the crowd. Discipline isn't just doing something consistently, it's also resisting the urge to do the wrong thing impulsively. You can make a fortune slowly, but you can lose it instantly through one rash decision. When people hear discipline, they imagine a life of deprivation. But it's not about denying pleasure, it's about avoiding chaos. Discipline creates freedom. The disciplined investor doesn't worry about the next crash. The disciplined thinker isn't swayed by every new idea. The disciplined person sleeps better because their life is built on habits, not whims. The challenge is that discipline compounds invisibly. It's hard to measure in real time. You don't get applause for not buying a fancy car or for spending your evenings reading instead of watching TV. Nobody claps when you skip the gamble and stick with the sure thing. But that's how the scoreboard of life works. It only becomes visible years later. When I was young, I thought intelligence was the key to success. Over time, I realized that what really matters is temperament, how you behave when things get hard, when opportunities look irresistible, or when everyone else is losing their minds. Discipline is emotional intelligence in action. It's the refusal to be owned by impulse. There's a line I've always liked. The first rule of compounding is never interrupted unnecessarily. That's discipline distilled to its essence. You make good decisions, you let them mature, and you don't sabotage them out of boredom or greed. If you can do that, time becomes your ally. But we live in an age of distraction. People can't sit still for 5 minutes without reaching for their phones. They confuse motion with progress, noise with knowledge, and volatility with opportunity. And so they keep restarting the race instead of staying the course. That's the tragedy of modern life. We've built systems that reward impulsivity and punish patience. Billionaires don't escape this trap by being superhuman. They escape it by building systems around their discipline. They automate good behavior. They surround themselves with people who reinforce it. They remove temptations. They make doing the right thing easier than doing the wrong thing. It's not about willpower. It's about environment. And that's an important point. Discipline isn't about grinding through pain. It's about designing your life so that good choices are the default. If you keep cookies out of the house, you don't need willpower to eat well. If you stay within your circle of competence, you don't need courage to avoid dumb investments. Discipline is largely the art of removing friction between you and your best behavior. Over time, disciplined people start to look lucky because nothing seems to shake them. But it's not luck, it's structure. They've built their lives on principles that protect them from chaos. They don't win because they're smarter. They win because they keep showing up, doing the boring work, while everyone else quits when it stops being fun. The truth is, discipline doesn't just build wealth, it builds character. It's the foundation for all other virtues. You can't be wise without it, you can't be patient without it, and you certainly can't be consistent without it. It's the quiet force that holds everything together. So yes, discipline looks boring, but boring is underrated. In the long run, boring wins because boring lasts. If there's one truth people underestimate more than compound interest, it's this: you will become the average of the people you spend the most time with. The influence of association is so subtle, so powerful, that most people don't notice it happening until it's already shaped their character and their destiny. Human beings are social imitators. We copy each other far more than we reason. You can be brilliant, disciplined, and well-intentioned, but if you surround yourself with fools, liars, or gamblers, eventually you'll start to think, talk, and act like them. That's not philosophy, that's biology. Your mind mirrors your environment. So if you want to raise your standards, you must raise your company. I've always said, show me your heroes, and I'll show you your future. Because who you admire quietly writes the script of who you'll become. If you spend your time with people who cut corners, you'll start shaving off your own integrity. If you admire arrogance, you'll absorb it. But if you surround yourself with rational, honest, and reliable people, you'll start to rise almost without trying. The company you keep compounds, just like money, only faster. Most people underestimate how corrosive bad company really is. A single dishonest partner can ruin a lifetime of good decisions. A single greedy associate can destroy what took decades to build. I've seen it happen over and over again. Someone with intelligence and drive pairs up with the wrong person. Someone who's slippery with the truth, reckless with money, or addicted to ego, and suddenly everything they built starts to crumble. That's why Warren and I have always chosen our business partners with obsessive care. We'd rather miss 100 good deals than enter one bad partnership. The right people make everything easier. The wrong people make everything impossible. And you usually don't find out which kind you've got until something goes wrong. That's when character shows. People think intelligence is the most valuable trait in a partner. It's not. The most valuable trait is trustworthiness. You can build an empire with someone who's steady, loyal, and honest, but one clever scoundrel can bankrupt you. The world is full of smart crooks and charming idiots. Intelligence without integrity is just danger with good manners. And this doesn't just apply to business. It applies to marriage, friendship, mentorship, every relationship that touches your life. Each one is an investment of your time and energy. Some of those investments will pay dividends forever. Others will drag you into bankruptcy of the soul. If you treat partnership with the same seriousness you treat financial risk, your odds of success go up exponentially. There's a psychological mechanism behind all of this. Humans are suggestible. We absorb the norms of the group without realizing it. If your circle values gossip, you'll start gossiping. If it values learning, you'll start reading more. You don't just borrow your friends' opinions, you borrow their habits, their attention span, even their emotional temperature. That's why billionaires guard their circles so carefully. They curate their environment like a gallery. And curating your environment doesn't mean cutting everyone off. It means being intentional about influence. You can still be kind to everyone, but you shouldn't let everyone have equal access to your mind. Some people inspire you to be better. Others drain you until mediocrity feels normal. You have to learn the difference. The irony is good company tends to feel boring at first. Ethical, rational people aren't as exciting as reckless ones. They don't gossip much. They don't gamble much, and they don't chase the crowd. But over time, you realize that peace, trust, and reliability are worth far more than excitement. Excitement fades. Character compounds. I've often said that the best way to get what you want in life is to deserve it. And the best way to deserve good partners is to be one. You attract what you mirror. If you want trustworthy people, be trustworthy. If you want competent allies, become competent. If you want rational company, live rationally yourself. The magnet works both ways. Over the years, I've seen a pattern. The people who end up happy and prosperous are usually those who learned early that the world is full of bad influences and that the safest strategy is selective exposure. They didn't let envy or greed draw them into the wrong circles. They kept their associations clean, their standards high, and their reputations intact. If you want to ruin your life quickly, it's easy. Start hanging around people who make excuses, blame others, or treat integrity like an optional extra. They'll pull you down quietly, one rationalization at a time. But if you want to build something that lasts, find people whose presence demands your best behavior. People who make you sharper, humbler, and more curious. And remember, you don't need a big circle. You just need a strong one. A few good partners, honest, consistent, ethical, can carry you further than 1,000 opportunists. Quality of company beats quantity of connections every time. The truth is, partnership is leverage. The right people multiply your strengths. The wrong people multiply your weaknesses. So choose carefully, because once you invite someone into your circle, they're not just part of your life, they're part of your trajectory. If there's one trait I've noticed in truly successful people, not the loud ones, not the ones who flash it, but the ones who quietly build and keep it, it's their love of simplicity. They think simply, they act simply, and they make their lives simpler, not more complicated. Now, most people mistake complexity for sophistication. They think if something sounds complicated, it must be smart. But the truth is, complexity is often a mask for confusion. Simplicity, when it's done right, is a sign of real understanding. When you truly grasp an idea, you can express it clearly. You don't need jargon, you don't need theatrics, and you certainly don't need to make it sound harder than it is. The problem is that human beings are addicted to overthinking. We wrap our lives, our plans, and our businesses in layers of unnecessary detail because it makes us feel intelligent. But simplicity requires humility. It requires saying, I don't need to look clever. I need to be clear. And that's harder than it sounds. Billionaires, the ones who actually built things rather than just inherited them, tend to strip the world down to first principles. They're constantly asking, what really matters here? And what can I ignore? That's not laziness, it's discipline. Complexity is often what people use when they don't want to make the hard decisions. It's a distraction, a fog that hides indecision. Simplicity cuts through that fog. Take investing, for example. Everyone wants a complex formula, a secret algorithm, some edge no one else has. But the truth is boring. Buy good companies, don't overpay, and let time work. That's it. People don't like that answer because it sounds too simple. But the world doesn't reward complexity. It rewards clarity executed over time. It's the same in life. People make endless plans and set endless goals. But most of them are just noise. If you ask someone what they want, they'll list 20 things. If you ask someone who's really thought about it, they'll say one or two. The clearer your priorities, the more powerful your actions. Complexity divides focus. Simplicity amplifies it. One of the smartest habits you can develop is to constantly simplify your thinking. When you face a decision, ask yourself, what's the essence of this problem? Most people never do that. They drown in details and miss the point entirely. But the great minds, the ones who seem almost prophetic, have a knack for boiling chaos down to a few basic truths. You see, simplicity doesn't mean being naive. It means seeing reality without the clutter of wishful thinking. It means understanding cause and effect clearly enough to know what really drives results. It means ignoring the trivia that consumes everyone else's attention. The mind loves complexity because it keeps it busy, but busyness isn't progress. There's a reason Einstein said everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. The trick is to strip away what's unnecessary without losing what's essential. That's real mastery. When Warren and I evaluate a business, we're not looking at 1,000 variables. We're asking a few basic questions. Is it understandable? Is it run by honest people? Does it have durable economics? That's simplicity. And that's why it works. Complexity, on the other hand, breeds fragility. The more moving parts you have, the more chances for failure. The more assumptions you make, the more likely one of them will be wrong. Simplicity is robust. It survives chaos because it doesn't depend on perfection. Philosophically, simplicity is also moral clarity. Most of life's ethical questions are not that complicated. People make them complicated because they don't like the obvious answer. The simplest path, telling the truth, keeping promises, acting fairly, is often the hardest one to follow, but it's also the one that compounds best over time. And this is where simplicity ties back to every other principle we've discussed. Inversion, patience, discipline, bias, partnership, they all rely on cutting through noise. They all demand that you recognize what's essential and ignore the rest. Complexity distracts. Simplicity directs. If you look closely at the lives of great thinkers, you'll notice a pattern of subtraction. They don't accumulate endless activities or ideas. They refine, they reduce. They focus on fewer things, done better. And as they do, their results begin to look extraordinary, even though the process itself is ordinary. That's the paradox of simplicity. It's so simple that most people overlook it. It takes real wisdom to keep things simple in a world that rewards complication. Every system, government, business, education, tends to expand until it collapses under its own weight. The people who survive those collapses are the ones who can see through the noise, the ones who kept things straightforward when everyone else got lost in their own cleverness. When you commit to simplicity, you gain something rare, mental clarity. You stop reacting to every new piece of information and you start thinking in principles instead of trivia. You become harder to manipulate, harder to confuse, and harder to shake. The world gets more chaotic, but your mind stays steady. Simplicity doesn't mean easy. It means focused. It means distilled. It means you've done the hard work of thinking clearly enough to see what actually matters. Most people will spend their lives avoiding that work, hiding behind complexity. but the few who embrace simplicity will quietly outthink, outlast, and outperform the rest. The real billionaire mindset isn't about private jets or fancy watches. It's about private discipline and mental clarity. You don't have to be rich to think like them. Just remember, the biggest edge in life is a calm mind, independent thought, and a long-term view.